Hello, church. Welcome to Genesis 43, 44, and 45, and welcome to chapters that are all about Jesus and all about New Testament living in the Old Testament. This is awesome. Let me just point out a couple things, and then you can get on with spending time with the Lord, okay? In chapter 43, verse 12, for instance, I want you to notice that Jacob is already living with incredible integrity of heart. And that is, again, something that isn't been spelled out to him by Moses' law, that hadn't been received yet. Here he's just living out God's moral standards, and he already knows what would please the Lord. I also want you to see in the end of verse 14, 43 verse 14, where he gets to this place of surrender, where Jacob essentially says, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. He is willing to step out in faith. He is a little bit worried about what the potential cost could be, but it's not stopping him from moving forward. That's a place of full surrender. That is a lesson that you and I can all learn from today. We are actually supposed to be in that place with the Lord too. And you might even just park right there in your devotions and say, Lord, is there anything that I'm holding on to in my life that I'm not willing to surrender to you? And am I willing to step out in faith and obey you, even if it feels to me like it's going to cost me a lot? Just surrender that to the Lord, acknowledge it in prayer, and then move forward in obedience, just like you see Jacob did in this chapter. And then in verse 44, first of all, maybe just I want to point something out so you don't get too sidetracked by this. But in verse 5 and in verse 15, Joseph is pretending, he's playing with his brothers a little bit, and he is pretending to be a good Egyptian, okay? So when it talks about divination here, we don't have to worry that he is actually doing those things. He's just using this to toy with his brothers a little bit, if you will. We know from the previous chapters and from the following chapters that he recognizes there is only one God. And that is how he has a relationship with that one true God. Nothing else here, okay? But then when we get into verse 18, chapter 44, verse 18 through the end of the chapter, right through verse 34, as you read that, you're going to recognize that Judah goes well out of his way to plead with Joseph to take the place of his younger brother. And as you read those words, think about how that is an example of what Jesus does for you and me. He went well out of his way to then come and intercede for you and lobby on your behalf. He would love to step into your world and take your weight and carry it for you so that you don't have to carry it. And that's exactly what he did on the cross. He stepped into our world. He is lobbying, interceding. He is our intercessor on our behalf. And he does that for you. As you read that chapter, just celebrate that with Jesus. And just let yourself worship him. Call it out loud. Speak it out and just say, Jesus, I just thank you so much that you would do that on my behalf. How blessed am I to know you. And then if you get into chapter 45, I just want to point something out. There's lots that you could glean from here. But in the end of verse 7 in chapter 45, it just talks about how Joseph recognized that God has sent him on ahead to cause great deliverance. He says to save your lives by a great deliverance. And so you'll see a principle that's happening here, that God has allowed this famine to take place, but he has provided a way out to deliver them. And that lines up with 1 Corinthians 10:13, where it's made very obvious and clear that God is faithful and will never allow us to encounter anything in which he does not already provide a way out for. And he is faithful like that, and he will always do that. And so you can celebrate that with the Lord. And just be mindful going forward that if you're tempted into sin, or you're tempted into being given into a difficult situation and become depressed or discouraged about it, always recognize God is faithful, always provides a way out, and will sustain you through it. And so just celebrate that with him. You will also notice that when you get down to chapter 45, verse 20, is that Pharaoh speaks through Joseph, and he gives this message for Joseph to tell his family Never mind about all your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours. If you just put yourself there for a second, you know how crazy it would be for Joseph's family to say, no, I think we're good here to suffer it out in the famine. We'll be fine. That would be foolish when all of the best of Egypt is waiting for them. But in the same way, often you and me are tempted to do the same thing. We would be tempted to store up treasures on earth rather than store up treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy. And you'll recognize those are words of Jesus. Much of Matthew 6 calls you to exactly that way of thinking. You could even ask yourself this question: am I focused on trying to eke it out here on this earth, or am I actually looking forward to the best of all that heaven has to offer? Just celebrate Jesus today. So good.